Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the SEND review session. I know some of you were on the call earlier on and hopefully you'll have had a quick break or grabbed a cup of tea and you're now ready and settled to join us for this session. Can I ask that everybody is on mute and then I can do some introductions to the SEND review team that are joining us today. So we've got Mike Davies, we've got Helen Nix, and we've got Georgina. Sorry, Georgina, I can't remember your last name. And if I hand over to Mike first, who will do the introductions. Thank you. Hi,
thanks, Dina. Just to say, before we get into the presentations and sort of chance for Q&A and so on, well, how great it is to be able to join another NMPCF event. I remember one of the first events that we came to where we just launched the review back at the sort of late 2019 was the event that you had up in Chester, and that was fantastic as we had such great input, and I was quite new in the post at that point and learned so much about the SEND system and all the challenges that exist with it, and it was just great to hear so much positive and helpful engagement and input for us, and we've kind of had that all the way through. So Mrunal and Tina, we've met very regularly and have really appreciated all of their input as we've been making progress with the SEND review. It's obviously been a bit stop and start, as people will be aware, as COVID has kind of intervened on us, but that engagement has been invaluable all the way through the process, and especially the skunkworks sessions that you ran more recently, and I know that Mrunal was talking through this morning. So just wanted to say thank you for all your input, and I'm sure today will prove just as equally helpful. So with that in mind, without any further ado, I'll hand over to Helen.
This is very exciting, and thank you, Mike. So I'm hoping you can all see your screen. We were talking earlier about the importance of co-production. Had you seen 5 of your kind of greatest and most illustrious all simultaneously going, no, just press that button, you'll be fine. It would have been a very beautiful thing. It was a really good example in a way of the kind of co-production that sort of defined our approach to the SEND review. Now, I am desperately trying to make the stupid thing press the buttons. Here we go. So hopefully you can now see a slide that says what we intend to cover. And in a nutshell, what we're trying to say here is, as quickly as possible, what the vision is that we're trying to build and how your insights have helped build it, how we've worked with the information you've given us and how that aligns with other partners, as much as we can, what we're going to recommend, and crucially, because I know, I mean, Mrunal talked a little bit to this earlier, but absolutely when and as much as we can, and when will some of these changes start to take effect. Now, we were talking earlier about how much expectation and excitement there is about this, and we talked a little bit about how sometimes people can get misquoted and misrepresented. What I want you to think as we go through this is to listen to the whole, not just the component bits, because this is sort of just try not to take any of this stuff out of context. This is absolutely a work in progress, but one that we are keen to work with you. But first, and to echo what the wonderful Mike Davies said, thank you. To be honest, if I were to say nothing else in the presentation, yes, it would be a bit boring, but it would actually be valid and appropriate use of your time, because I cannot imagine how it is that you guys have been dealing with the impact of the pandemic alongside all these skunk work sessions, all these thoughts that you've been having and sharing with us so generously. And honestly, you couldn't have had a better advocate than Mrunal and Tina, who have both supported and challenged in the best possible way. When they think that we're not listening, they say, but whenever they speak, whatever they say, I promise you they're listening really, really hard. And the vision that I think that we are working our way to is absolutely based on what you've said. Now, in terms of the problem that the review is trying to solve, I think there's a great deal of common ground in this. I don't want to negate the fact that there is actually loads of brilliant practice out there, because there is, and I'm crystal clear about that. But equally, not all of it is that great. And too often, the current system is delivering poor outcomes at really high cost. And everybody involved with it is having a poor experience. And that's no good for anyone. Just as a public servant, you know, sitting here atop all this taxpayers' money, we have to address that. But more because I cannot sit back and watch a generation not have the life chances they should, because it's difficult to work together to deliver the support they need. And so we have listened carefully to not just you guys, but shed loads of other people as well, local authorities, CCGs, you know, just loads, social workers, you know, loads and loads and loads of people. And somebody, Maureen, I think, asked earlier, said, well, what is the areas which is common? What do they all agree on? What do they disagree on? Actually, I have yet to hear a single person disagree with the following statements. That we want a sustainable system which puts families at the heart and gives children, young people with SEND support at the earliest possible opportunity so they can live healthy and fulfilled lives, including employment, including dates and mates and all the things that we as grown-ups get to enjoy. And we think that there are 4 main areas where we need to put in place to do that. First is to really find ways to embed preparing for adulthood at the earliest possible stage, because let's face it, by and large, people start talking about preparation for adulthood 13, 14. It's too late. We need to get that in place much, much earlier. And in a similar vein, and by God, this was sort of your headline from earlier on, we have to get not just identify needs, but actually intervene to address them as early as we possibly can, without you having to ask, without you as families having to push, just have it offered. And we want to do that specifically so we can speak to, I think, Tracy or Benedict's point about stopping people having to fail before we help. We need to edge to that place. We need to be clearer about the role of mainstream, who clearly have a pivotal place in that. And also we need to make sure that the funding and the accountabilities match what we are asking people to do. Now, that's not 100% read across to what the thinking that Mrunal and Tina have been doing with you, but it's not bad, is it? It's pretty jolly close. And that's because everybody agrees with those things. Where our opinions differ is how. So let's talk about the how a little. What this beautiful diagram is trying to say is that we want to get to a place where we can, sorry, I'm just going to try and admit somebody. Oh, no, don't press any buttons, Helen. That's what the thing I've learned from that, a little interchange. So a little bit in terms of the how. So that we want to find ways to use existing screening checks to identify challenges earlier. We want, very much as Mrunal was saying earlier, we want there to be greater confidence in how to meet special educational needs and disability in mainstream. And we want, as much as we possibly can, to find a way of making sure that we're all clear that these are all our children and that they are assets, and that the best way to help them is to work with you. And last, at the 2019 conference, I understand that the biggest cheer was about only schools that can demonstrate they are outstanding for kids who SEND, or good for those who SEND, can get an outstanding grading. They've already agreed to that principle, which I think is jolly good. Education, health and care plans. There was a debate earlier about whether or not we're scrapping those. We're not scrapping those. We think there is a case for more tailored support, backed by what is effectively better SEND support. So absolutely, yes, to EHCPs, but we do wonder how we can better streamline the process so that you can get that additional support if you need it more quickly. We want to build a world where, for those with more complex needs, whether that's just a special school or an AP placement or a residential placement, we want to make sure that that's both of high quality and close to home, and makes the best use of what we know. So we want, I think, to, and there's already some best practice about this with regard to things like alternative provision. There's already some practice where, you know, pupils will tell you, I'm here for a term or two, so work out how to manage my behaviour, and then I'm going back into mainstream. So we want to make that kind of a little bit more fluid. And then finally, and we've nodded to this already, preparation for adulthood. We want to make sure that we actually design pathways that take kids from 0 to 25 effectively. That, in a nutshell, is what the main things are that we are thinking about. Do not forget that when you look at that vision, the first thing it says is that idea of partnership and putting families at the centre. And this turns us to our inevitable question. When will we publish? Runal gave some pretty jolly sensible thoughts on this earlier. The public line on this is spring. Spring this year, just so we're all clear, we are talking about months rather than years. We are all crystal clear that we have to get this document out. But when I say this document, I do it quite specifically because it's only going to be a document. Don't get me wrong, it's going to be a really fantastic document. We are working unbelievably hard to make sure that it reflects all the steers that you and others have given us, but it is only a document, and it is going to be a consultation. And the reason we're consulting is because, for two reasons really. One is because we've necessarily only been able to speak to a relatively small number of people. I mean, you know, quite a lot of them, but not the entire range of people who are involved in this area. So we need to sort that out, and we need everybody to have their say. And the reason we need everyone to have their say is because this is essentially the beginning of a change programme. Change is always difficult. Some of the things that I'm outlining to you are actually pretty radical in their scope. And when you've got a change as complicated as that, you have to ask and seek views so you can take people on that journey with you. But I can guarantee you that we are doing all within our gift to make it as good a journey as possible and to take us to exactly the place that we all want to go to, which is a place where these are all our children, all being prepared for independence, happy, fulfilled, healthy adulthood. And I've yet to hear anyone say no to that, although I look forward to it. Now, so I'm about to stop sharing my screen and open us up for questions. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen altogether because I don't know how to make it work. So hang on one jolly moment. Pause share. Stop share. I'm going to stop talking now.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat. Where was the one about joint working? There's one about social care, so let me just try and find that a second, because I thought it was a very good question, but now I can't find it. Let's just go to the autism one first of all. So children that mask their autism are unlikely to be picked up in early years. What is missing currently is a pathway for support with a later diagnosis. So it's not more of a question, but rather a statement. And I think as well with acronyms, can we just be mindful of acronyms? Because one of the questions around what is AP, somebody was very helpful and answered it in the chat. No, it's fine. We all do it, including us. So don't worry. And there's a few questions around who you all are and what your job roles are. So we've all answered that. All three of us were very quick. So they've had multiple answers. Luckily, they're all the same. So that's a good that's a good one. So somebody else has put it might vary in mainly key stage 2 upwards. And I think that is something we're all mindful of, is that at different points in people's education or children's education, there is different support mechanisms that should be looked at, and different opportunities. But I think, I guess, again, that is something you're all mindful of, wouldn't you say, Mike?
Yes. Shall we try and pick up on a couple of those? So I think the couple relating to autism. So there is obviously an autism strategy in development that the Department of Health and Social Care are working on. We've been, colleagues in the department have been feeding into that. Obviously, DFE has been working with the Department of Health on rolling out autism awareness training as well for staff. So hopefully that will help staff in mainstream understand and identify potential instances of autism where they come across them, and make sure people are referred into the right support. The sort of question of how do you best support those children who can access a mainstream curriculum but need extra support to do so, or may not be able to cope in just a normal mainstream environment, is one that we're really interested in through the review. How do we make sure the right support wraps around those children? It may be that specialist provision is more appropriate for some people, but obviously we don't have a very clear categorization of special schools at the moment, and they might not be the best fit for everybody. So how we could make that less of a binary choice, and obviously increase instances of things like specialist units and resource provision, so that sort of specialist support can be more readily available attached to a mainstream school, are things that we're looking at very closely. There was also a point about the links to the review for the social care review as well, and I'm sure people will be aware that they are just at the moment working through their terms of reference, and they're obviously just setting off, whereas we're getting to the point now, hopefully, of being close to being able to publish some ideas. So we're obviously talking closely with that school as well, and had conversations with Josh. I think partly, no doubt, their sort of scope will be informed by what we publish and what our areas of focus are on the SEND review. I think there is huge expectation around the care review, obviously, and I don't think they will be able to review every aspect of the care system and social care system. So they're having to, at the moment, think through, well, what's the right area of focus. But we are certainly talking to them about making sure that disability services are included in that, and that we kind of join up where we can. That's the kind of two I'd clocked. Tina, but I can see the chat is moving very fast. Are there any other questions you picked up?
Yeah, this is the problem with the chat when you've got over 100 people on the call, and they are very good at asking questions, and really good questions. So what I will say at this point is that we haven't got enough time to answer all the questions, but what we'll do is we'll gather them and answer them and put them either on our website, or we'll try and answer them the best we can here, just so you know. So, okay, Richard's question you answered in some ways around the care review, and he said that actually 50% of children looked after will have SEND, and I think that is something that certainly when we're on boards like the Vulnerable Children's Board, it is something that we talk about, and it is this thing where there's lots of different work streams happening within the DFE. And NHS England and DHSC, but again, it's putting that consistent message across in all of these meetings. And the NMPCF is really lucky because we do sit on those, and it is about those cross-government workings, which you do as a team as well. Mike. Okay, he's muted.
Yeah, no, but they are very cognizant of that statistic as well.
Yeah, and Maureen's put in the chat, if it all comes to fruition, what likelihood is going to influence the review into social care, which is so many of our young people will be recipients of, which currently seem to be focused on the elderly. I am aware that this is a different department, but as government state aim is to sort out social care, there needs to be a government department needs to work together. And I think that is the message we do give consistently as well. I'm just going back up the chat because I don't want to miss anybody out. I think the other thing is around is accountability. So one of the questions in the chat was about that they felt a lot of local authorities do not meet their statutory requirements when helping and supporting young people with SEND. So is there anything in the SEND review that you're looking at in regards to accountability?
Yes, we are. And I think this is one of the things that Marina will have covered as well, in terms of how we can get that sort of consistent national definition of what good SEND support means and what should be ordinarily available, and a kind of minimum standard of what parents should be able to expect from a school as a building block, hopefully, but to get as a starting point to make sure there is much more national consistency around that offer. And the question of then how you then build accountability for that and make it work is one that we're thinking about very carefully, and one that we will want to be consulting you on as well. But certainly kind of rebalancing, putting more emphasis on what's currently the non-statutory end of the system is a very clear focus for us.
And can I just add to that on a related point? So the question was if these things come to fruition. I think they have to. I think we all have to take a step back and actually commit to operating slightly differently. And I think not just as kind of families, but also across services, because in a way, what happened with the 2014 reforms is that we all fell back into bad habits really very quickly for all sorts of understandable reasons. And I think we won't change this if we can't be not just more optimistic, but actually play our part in making it happen. Now, you guys have made a fantastic role in delivering that change, but I just would challenge us all to be to actually do exactly that, to deliver this change and try and treat this as a kind of system reboot almost of that SEND system and move on from it. Because in all honesty, what we're trying to do is learn the best of what's happened over the last 6 years and shift to spreading that best practice. But we have to actually keep the faith, because it can be different, and it will be.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to amalgamate two questions together because they are very, very similar. So it's about funding mainstream schools to support children and young people, as it always comes down to money to pay for staff and resources, which then falls into the traded service for specialist support in schools. So speech and language therapies, EP services, advisory teachers are all traded resources and support. So how can we, if we're changing the SEND, code practice and we're doing that as part of the SEND review, how can we make sure that the schools have enough finances or use, not just have more finance, but actually utilize what they've got better, so then they can get this this sort of traded support in place? Because what we find is when parents request an EP, for instance, schools will turn around and say, no, we can't afford it. And then they end up going down the private route. And actually what we need to do is make sure the systems are in place, that everybody has that equitable right to get that support. Because what we also find is that families can't afford it. They might end up getting loans to pay for it, or some that are more affluent are getting more support because they can pay for it. So how can we make this more of an equitable service? Yeah.
And that's a really good point, right? It should be equitable and fair to everybody. And so we shouldn't be relying on parents having to fund things themselves. I think in that kind of the answer I gave before about looking at what a reasonable expectation is of mainstream schools, we're very interested in how, in defining that, about how far it should include provision of those sorts of traded targeted services. What's reasonable to try and arrange at a level of an individual school, and then what might be, how could we support better a delivery of those services above that level? So perhaps at more of a kind of district or locality stage, which a lot of some local areas are already doing quite effectively. So working with the local authority to avoid the kind of binary choice between either you're in school or you need an EHCP, and free up availability of those kind of services. So those kind of models and how best we would we would organise that support is one of the things we will certainly want to be looking at and asking questions about. And in parallel with that, as you rightly say, a big issue is how the funding flows. And we're sort of fortunate in a way that there are some big changes being made to school funding and the introduction of the NFF and various consultations coming forward on those. And we work very, very closely with the funding team in the department to try and work out what we think the best sustainable funding arrangement would be for schools, and how we could put more of the SEND budget in the hands of schools locally to be able to make that kind of support available to families who need it.
Go on. Sorry,
well, I was just going to say that I picked up there was a related point about sort of culture and training as well, and just to reassure that that's another area that we're looking at really closely. Have we got the right teacher training offer? There was a lot of input from SEND organisations to the development of the new teacher training syllabus and the early career framework. So we're working with that team about how we can make sure that is delivered in a way that puts helps teachers to feel confident in dealing with SEND in their classrooms, but also then what's the right role for the SENCO, the training and expertise that they should have, and to give them a kind of be able to play a leadership role in the school in terms of helping everyone provide good SEND provision. So definitely teacher training and skills, definitely another areas that we will be covering.
Thank you. I just want to, I've just been reminded that we've got somebody on the call that is visually impaired and can't see the chat. So I just wanted to say Mike Davies is the director and is in charge of the SEND review. Georgina is his deputy director. Georgina Clark, so I know your name, that second name now, Georgina. And we've got Helen Nix, who is the lead for the SEND review team. So hopefully that will clarify, and apologies to that person. I just didn't think. Okay, so I'm just mindful of time and the fact that we are going to get people working. This is something that hopefully will work. Our whiz, which is Helen in the background, is going to put us into smaller working groups, and each group will be in charge of a specific question. There will be SEND review team colleagues and NMPCF colleagues within those groups, and hopefully we'll be able to do a little bit more work around the questions that are more important to you, hopefully. And you should be back in the main session. You haven't got lost on the way. I'm looking at the screen. I can see some of my breakout group 1 are back, so that's good. We'll just wait a couple more minutes for everybody else to come back and join us. Cool. Okay. So Mike, did you want to say something?
Well, have we got time just to hear a few headlines from each of the groups? I think that would be fantastic. Certainly the group that I was in was really useful. And I'd be really interested to kind of pour over the chat as well, if you can share that with us.
Yeah,
make sure we don't miss anything.
That's fine. I mean, we were in breakout 1, which our subject was good quality SEN support, and we had some really good conversations in that group, and more about maybe formalising the SEN support side of things. So the making statutory an IEP type system where you could have regular conversations and reviews with the class teacher, with the SENCO, because actually the thought process around that was you're more likely to have good conversations, targeted support, and then you wouldn't need the HCP necessarily. So it's about focusing on that early intervention, that SEN support, and making it more formalised. So I think that was in a very brief nutshell, and a lot of the stuff is still in the chat if anybody wants to have a look at that. But we will share the chat, and I'm just conscious of our participant who's visually impaired, and we will send some of the chat to him separately. Who was in group 2, which was improve EHCP? Helen, you're on mute.
I am muted, and first time for everything. So really helpful conversation, and so sorry to all of those who in terms of prioritising, because we struggled to do that a bit, I think, and that was down to me. I think the number one thing I heard was about accountability, particularly in relation to schools who don't have the resources to be able to deliver the requirements of the plan. I think there was broad agreement about the importance of a national template, but equally greater emphasis on the annual review process and the role for social care, with a side serving of clarity on responsibilities and clearer plans. It was a fairly detailed conversation, but that is my attempt to summarise it very briefly.
Thank you. And Claire's nodding, so I guess she was in your group. Okay, so that leaves Georgina. So you must have led the third group.
Yeah. Did we all get, very neatly divided up? That worked out really well. So yes, we were talking about where necessary, how can children and young people come off EHCPs? It was a great discussion, really helpful from my perspective. And we talked about the fact that a lot of the time children and young people don't want to be on EHCPs, and it actually is that their parents are petrified of this, the fact that after you come off it, there are no viable options. What can you do for employment, for sort of social stimulation, intellectual stimulation, etc. So we had quite a discussion about the idea of moving to something like an employment health and care plan, or having a transition plan, or something that kind of supported you. But the sort of big thing that I heard was the importance of having something to roll off onto, and having opportunities and options after you come off it. And we talked about prevention as well, so having that early support in before you even need to get to the point of a plan. But yeah, lots of really, really helpful points made.
Brilliant, thank you. So Mike, back to you. Do you want any other questions that we need answering? Because there's quite a lot in the chat which we do need to disseminate, and we haven't got enough minutes to go through each individual comment. So is there anything you wanted to ask or add?
I mean, I'm happy if you want to pick any out in the time we've got to try and answer some more, Tina. But I mean, I think what's been really encouraging for me is that these are I think there's a lot of similarity between the issues that you're raising and the things that we're currently grappling with. There's obviously a limit to how much of that we can kind of share while we're still discussing it with ministers and they're kind of making their choices about how we frame the consultation. But it's very heartening for me, and I think for the team, that we are looking in the right areas, and that is hopefully because we've heard so much from you over the last year, and through Tina and Brunel, so many good and sensible ideas for where we should be focusing. And I think real themes for me, a lot more consistency nationally in terms of how the SEND system operates, which as a basis then for like real accountability, both on local authorities, on the other partners, like with a role to play like health, but also a much clearer articulation about what mainstream schools can and should be doing in this space, sort of rebalancing that what is currently that non-statutory offer, and trying to get those specialists back into the classroom and back into schools, providing help early rather than at the end of this protracted and painful EHCP process, which I don't think anybody relishes going through. So yeah, I mean, I just thank you very much for always giving us so much of your time and energy, and being so thoughtful in your contributions. And I would say we look forward to talking to you much more as the sort of process continues.
Thank you, Mike, for that. I just want to say thank you everybody that's joined today and taken time out of their extremely busy schedule. Part of the parent participation logo, which is Helen, has just reminded me that we will be sending out a feedback link, and it is just one link for the 2-day session. So if you could feed back to us how you found the sessions, because obviously this is something new that we've done this year because we can't meet face to face. And we do know that it's been really popular. We want to make sure we get it right moving forward. But we want to say thank you so much to the SEND review team for coming in and talking to us. And thank you very much for everybody who's participated. It's been really, really good, helpful sessions, I think. Listening to what's been discussed in all 3 groups, I think it's been beneficial for everybody. And the chat is really, really good. I think that people are talking about graduated response and core standards, and that's what we need to do. It's about making sure that we collectively discuss these things together, and hopefully we'll come out with a more unified approach to all things SEND. So thank you very much for that. I've got some nods from Amanda. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.